Remember, you can get in touch with our Fearsome Foursome by emailing clubdubpodcast@mail.com and through Twitter, using the hashtag @clubdubpodcast.
Welcome to the
Club Dub Football Podcast,
where the only question is,
does your team make it into the club?
Can he get in? No, he cannot!
Hi, I'm Rob Rose, and welcome to another episode of the Club Dub Football Podcast. This week we've got a pod packed with more picks than an overtime game with Jameis Winston, as we review all of the round one selections from this year's NFL Draft. So to review all of the highs and some of the very occasional lows, I'll be joined by PB, JB and Aldrin as usual. So, with so much to get into, let's get on with the show.
With the first pick in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Jacksonville Jaguars select Trevor Lawrence, quarterback, Clemson.
Hi, gents.
Hi, Rob.
Hello.
Away from our usual spot of a Thursday night, we're here enjoying the Friday night lights on a Friday, a day removed from the first round of the NFL Draft, which means rather than talk about what might happen, we're going to spend the next hour talking about what did happen. And before we get on to the grades, we'd give our own individual teams. Phil, I hear you have a rather exciting draft-themed quiz of the week.
Welcome to Phil's Quiz of the Week.
I do, thank you, Rob. So I've actually got two questions this week. So why don't we kick off with the first one? In modern NFL history, so let's say from 1980 onwards, there have only been two drafts without a Hall of Famer selected. Can you name either of those years?
Ooh, that's good.
Well, I'm assuming the last two, because don't you have to have at least retired for 3 years to be in the Hall of Fame?
I should clarify them with eligible.
Oh,
Eligible.
okay. All right.
1980.
No,
80 wasn't it? Oh, was that 79? When was Elway? Okay, you guys keep thinking I'm going to Google when Elway was drafted.
I've genuinely no idea.
Yeah, 1990.
It's not,
no, you're close with both of them.
Okay. I mean, at least I'm close.
not making great podcast listening just yet, is it?
The first year draft in the modern era without a Hall of Fame was 1984.
Okay.
Which kind of had an excuse because they'd held a special supplemental draft for players that year who'd already signed with the USFL or CFL. So from that draft, there was Steve Young, Gary Zimmerman and Reggie White. So the only year without such an excuse, with no Hall of Famer, 1992. And the top five picks, anyone know any of the top five picks from 1992?
All five of them, but I'll let you go.
Steve Emptman, Quinton Coriat, Sean Gilbert, Desmond Howard, and Terrell Buckley.
With the exception of Desmond Howard, I'm not sure you got any of those names right.
Well, yeah.
I mean,
with the four families of those.
With the exception of Desmond Howard, I haven't heard of any of those others before. And I think the only reason we know Desmond Howard is because of the Green Bay Packers Super Bowl team in the 90s.
Notable.
Well, it's a reasonable way to be remembered.
Yeah.
So my second question, who is the lowest drafted quarterback to win the Super Bowl?
Oh, hold on. I'm going to go Trent Dilfer.
Ooh, yeah, that's a good shout.
No.
Was he lower than Brady? No, was he lower than Brady though?
Well, that's what I'm aiming for. Yeah, you're trying to think who's going to be lower than Brady, aren't you?
What are we defining
Trent
this as?
Dilfer was drafted round one, number 6. So,
jeez,
was he?
Yeah.
Are we defining this by quarterback who started the specific game?
The lowest drafted quarterback to win a Super Bowl. I would presume he's the starter.
Presume as a starter, yeah.
Yeah.
Hang on, let me do a quick fact check.
I mean, the fact that Phil doesn't know the name suggests that it's a random number.
It's just old. I believe, yeah, he was the starter. 2-time Super Bowl champion, 2-time Super Bowl MVP.
This isn't going to be Buccaneers themed, is it?
It's not, no.
No, because it couldn't be.
2-time Super Bowl champion, 2 times MVP.
Bart Starr.
Bart Starr is correct. Super Bowl champion and MVP, Super Bowl 1 and Super Bowl 2. He was drafted
No idea.
in 1956, round 17, pick 200. So one pick later than the greatest of all time, Tom Brady. The only 1 year since the draft was cut to 7 rounds in 1994, there's only been 1 year without a punter or kicker selected. Any ideas?
1999.
Oh, Rob, you're so close. Half a point for that. 1998, only year without a punter and a kicker selected.
See, the weird thing is I was going to say 1999 as well.
We are imparting knowledge on the people.
There we go.
There you go.
We are
something.
We are a news service.
We're also imparting it on ourselves because this is just random questions, Phil.
They are quite hard as well, Phil. I've got to be honest. But you know,
I'll
good.
loosen it up next week.
I mean, we can't blame Phil, or probably more accurately Google, for the questions that it churns out.
Thanks for listening. That was Phil's Quiz of the Week.
But thank you, Phil, for a wonderful triple threat that was Quiz of the Week. So with that covered, let's get on to the grades for our team last night, as we record at least, and how we think they did in the first round of the draft. So Aldrin, there was a lot of wondering and a lot of questioning about what might be left for the Colts picking as high as they were. Talk about your pick, and do you think it fulfills any kind of need?
Yeah, I think we've solved a really good need at edge with Kwity Paye. I think the fact that he was there for us to take is pretty good, really. Arguably one of the best, if not the best, edge rushers around. Certainly one without the injury questions that Jalen Phillips goes in with. And certainly I don't disagree with him going earlier, but Kwity Paye doesn't come with those injury concerns and has played a pretty high level at Michigan. So yeah, I'm really pleased with that. I think the only question I had when we got to that point and there was Christian Darrisaw left there, the tackle, that we maybe would have gone there and solved that left tackle spot early doors. But equally, I think the draft is pretty stacked with quality tackles this year, and I think we'd be fairly comfortable picking somebody in round 2. The talk's kind of been that we've been really interested in Samuel Cosme from Texas, and he looks like he'll be there where we're picking in round 2. So all being well, we solve a left tackle spot there with that pick. So I think getting Kwity Paye, because he was there, certainly made the most sense for us. So yeah, I'm really happy. I don't think we could have made a much better pick with where we were drafting for what we needed.
Definitely keeps you in the mix to be, well, significant playoff contenders based on the way the NFL landscape looks at the moment. So yeah, very nice pick. And JB, we talked about the Steelers having a myriad of needs. Was the pick the right one in your eyes?
Yes, on the proviso that they solve the O-line issues fairly early on tonight. And I kind of, having dwelled on it for most of the day today, I kind of feel the same about the Steelers pick as I do about a lot of the picks that got made last night. There's no team that I think really made a bad choice. I think everyone picked a quality player. Just a lot of teams didn't seem to pick for the position that was the biggest need for them. And that will all come to bear based on how the rest of the draft goes. Getting Najee Harris at 24 is, I think it's a bit of a bargain. I wasn't expecting him really to be there. I was thinking that we might have to delve into kind of some of that tackle market outside of the big expectations from said like guys like Darrisaw that Aldrin's already mentioned. I think the comparisons they drew on the night and the comparisons for Harris that have been drawn are kind of Franco Harris, Jerome Bettis, those kinds of iconic Steelers running backs, and getting a player like that who, based on stats, outperformed Derrick Henry and Mark Ingram in comparison to when they were running backs from Alabama is great. It's not kind of you're not going to turn your nose up at that kind of thing. So I like the pick. I would just like to see further focus on the run game tonight.
And Phil, what do you think about the work done by the Buccaneers of Tampa Bay?
Yeah, I think it was a good pick for us, to be honest. I was surprised that he was still there. I think at that point, Joe Tryon. It's a need in a sense as much as any need that we had. You know, it's someone who's going to come and fill in on a rotational basis, hopefully learn from, you know, one or two of the best in the game at the moment in, you know, JPP and Shaq Barrett, and potentially replace JPP, you know, in a year or 2 years, who knows? So I think it was a good pick for us. I think he's got size and strength, and I think if he played last year or this season just gone, I think his draft stock would arguably have been higher, and he wouldn't have been there for us. So, you know, you could say not playing hurt his draft value because he opted out of the 2020 season, and would that have helped him improve, you know, both his skill set and his draft ranking? Probably, yeah. So I think it's a good thing that happened, but it was a bit of a surprise, to be honest. I mean, the Saints took Peyton Turner at 28, and he was, you know, below Tryon on my draft board. So I'm really surprised that you know, we were able to get a good player like that there. But yeah, I think it was a decent pick for us.
Nice. And I will round out with the Cardinals picking Zaven Collins and say we certainly didn't reach. I mean, I think we got a really good player, but the type of really good player that's going to be available halfway through the first round of the NFL draft. I think it speaks a bit about what the Cardinals are trying to do. Obviously, you know, two of the better cornerbacks had gone top 10, which nobody really saw. So, but with Collins, to get a linebacker who's 6'5", you know, when it wouldn't be unusual to see linebackers at the NFL level at between 5'11" and 6'1", I think says an awful lot about what we're trying to do defensively. We've obviously added an awful lot of players that can rush the passer, not only JJ Watt in the offseason, but obviously bringing Marcus Golden back from the Giants last season, I suppose in part because of the injury to Chandler Jones, but nevertheless, he's going to be on the roster next year. And the only thing I think is that, you know, if Hassan Riddick had stayed, maybe we could have done something very, very different. You know, it's that age-old argument that, you know, if we had a couple more million in relation to cap space, you know, and we could have kept Hassan Riddick, could we have been a bit bolder? But actually, you know what? It adds strength to an area of relative strength for me. The Cardinals have already got Jordan Hicks and obviously Isaiah Simmons and others that I think are, you know, primed for a good year this year. So we will see. But I do think that we will see is probably more, you know, do we end up being made to pay by not taking a cornerback? Or, you know, ultimately, will this guy absolutely fit into the scheme and the ideas that Vance Joseph has?
Zaven Collins note, if you've not watched it, the Cardinals have tweeted out a video of the phone call Steve Keim and Cliff Kingsbury and Michael Bidwell made to Collins. And actually, it's quite a good watch. So I'm sure you're all over it, Rob. If anyone else has not seen it, then check it out. It's a good video to watch.
Do you know what? It's a strange thing because being, you know, obviously a diehard Cardinals fan for as long as I have been, I will say that Michael Bidwell is a guy of absolute class, you know, a guy of real genuine kind of quality and heart to lead an organization. And you hear so many stories about him. I mean, the Kurt Warner story about him and his family potentially missing his Hall of Fame inauguration. He literally got in his own plane and made that all happen and flew them out there. I mean, the Bidwell family and the way they've led that franchise, I think is phenomenal. And yeah, it's always a great time for me, the draft, when you watch those videos. But, you know, I think you actually hit the nail on the head, Phil, with the kind of season that we've just had, with the impact COVID had with certain players sitting out. You know, as much as we look at these picks and feel pretty confident, I don't think there's ever been more doubt around how effective a draft class may or may not be. I think there will probably be some absolute bargains in the rounds that follow, but good that we're all feeling pretty confident about the picks that have been made so far. So with that done, then I'm going to go around our virtual room a second time now and moving outside of our own teams, or potentially outside of our own teams, who knows. I would love to get your quick thoughts before we have our general draft chat on the winners and losers as you saw it from round one. And Aldrin, as is customary, I'm going to throw it over to you first.
I've probably got two big winners, and they're quarterbacks that will be thrilled, I think, with the selections their team made. First one being Matt Ryan. I think he has got to be absolutely stoked to have Pitts in the room and them not kind of scratch that itch of, do we go Fields? Do we get a quarterback of the future? No, they've kind of stuck with best player on the board and they've got Kyle Pitts. And I think depending on how the rumors about Julio play out, if they have Pitts and Julio Jones on the same field along with Calvin Ridley, then I think that is a real potent offense that for the last few years, Matt Ryan has been playing pretty much lights out, top of his game. So I think that makes them a really scary offense. The other winner, I think, is Justin Herbert. I think he'll be really happy. They've got Rashawn Slater, kind of solved that left tackle need that they've got. And again, that makes that a really scary, potent offense, because you saw what Herbert could do last year with maybe not as good protection as he's potentially going to get this year. So, I think both of those guys will be absolutely thrilled. Losers, again, I've got two, but neither of them drafted. I think the Seahawks, gave up their first round pick to bring in Adams. I don't know that I see the return from what I saw from him last year. Great in the pass rush, but I mean, I saw him drop 3 or 4 stone cold interceptions from anybody with vaguely safe hands. So I don't know. Maybe I think the first round pick was a bit steep and they might rue that this year. And then the other one is obviously the Texans, who are just a dismal franchise. And I don't even think they've got a round 2 pick, have they? So it's going to be a real tough slog for them, because a heck of a lot of good players have gone off the board and are likely to go before they start picking again. So, for me, the losers are just the guys that didn't even have a chance to pick. So that's me.
Really exciting, isn't it, when you see records broken like Pitts? Was he the highest tight end selection of all time? I think going at 4, the unicorn of the draft. Yeah. But I think you make a really good point about Matt Ryan. Unlike other quarterbacks, I mean, maybe like Deshaun Watson and some as an example, he's a guy who has played absolutely brilliantly on a poor team now for a couple of seasons, Matt Ryan, and just not been noticed and not had the credit he deserves for all of those performances. And great to see that they're putting weapons around him. And by the sounds of things, sticking with the guy for the next few years. It feels like he's going to be part of that new coaching staff's plan. And I think that's a good thing for the Falcons.
Go on, Phil. You want to interject?
I was just going to say I disagree on the Falcons. I think what you said is right in terms of Ryan playing lights out the last few years. But they, let's not forget that last year they were scoring accidental touchdowns where Todd Gurley was running over the line when he didn't need to. And ultimately, remember, they lost that game. So the offense has never been a problem. If I were the Falcons, I'd have probably, you don't know what options are on the table, do you? But if there was a quarterback needy team that wanted to trade up, I'd have taken it and taken a defensive player and tried to get an additional, second pick or something like that and improve their defense more, because that's what let them down last year. And whether it's a new scheme might help and the new coaching or whatever, I don't know. But yeah, I think Pitts was a no-brainer for him. And if they were sticking at 4, they were going to take him. But I don't necessarily, as a fan of a team in that division, it doesn't make me necessarily any more worried about playing Atlanta than it did before, because their defense is rubbish.
So before I move on to my winners and losers, I think the consideration you have to make around the Falcons and Pitts is who's the head coach of the Falcons now. It's Arthur Smith. Where has Arthur Smith come from? He's come from the Titans. If there is a rookie head coach in this league who understands how important having that one single absolute superstar player is and how much that can impact what you can do on offense, it's Smith. Because essentially he's gone from having a refrigerator with legs who can run over people and run away from people in Derrick Henry to, as Rob described him, the absolute unicorn of that draft. There hasn't been a player like Pitts to draft for people, maybe ever, at least in recent memory. And having such an option of putting him out wide, putting him on the line, having him block, like there's even conversation around he can run the ball. And like we've seen with like Kelsey when they've run him in the Chiefs offense, that gadget player is, I think, a bit of a disservice because you associate that with guys like, no offense to him, Taysom Hill, who is jack of all trades, master of none. Pitts has the skill and the potential to be jack of all trades, master of all of those as well. And you're right in the fact that it's an absolute no-brainer to take him, really.
I think as well, just to round that point out, to your call out, Phil, in terms of should they have traded back, I'll be honest, I just don't think there were, once Trey Lance went 3 to the San Francisco 49ers, I just don't think there was a market for a quarterback needy team to trade up that high. The two teams that you would say were on the lookout and it inevitably did pick quarterbacks were Chicago, who were picking at 20, and New England picking at 15. Now, that's a heck of a long way to go to 4 from either of those slots to get quarterbacks you kind of expected based on, I know you can never predict, but based on what you know of the teams that are going ahead of you, I think they were both comfortable that quarterback would then slip beyond 10. So I just don't think there was a market there for somebody desperate enough to take Mac Jones at 4, say. So I just think Pitts is arguably the best player in the draft. Take out position, I think he's the best player in the draft potentially. So it was, to James's point, you take the best player available and that individual makes your team infinitely better. So I just think it's a great pick for them, and Matt Ryan will be absolutely loving another ridiculous offensive weapon.
Nice. JB, winners and losers from round 1 for you.
So I also had 2 winners. Firstly, and surprisingly, I think, given how everybody views on how they are successful in drafts, it's the Dallas Cowboys. I think drafting back with the the Eagles, which is a weird thing in itself because they were stunned by it on the NFL Network broadcast of the draft. But drafting back to still get the player that they could have got at 10, and arguably, and again, based on what we talked about last week, in my opinion, the best defensive player in the draft. And what you've now got is you've got that linebacking core that's lost, let's say, the leadership of Sean Lee with his retirement this week, but has now gained Micah Parsons to go along with Leighton Vander Esch and Jalen Smith. That is a terrifying trio of linebackers. And it doesn't matter who you're playing. Those 3, and I'm confident this, will tear through whatever you put in front of them. Because I think Jerry and the boys have actually come out quite well in all of this. The other one, and I am really excited to see what everybody else thinks of this, is the Jacksonville Jaguars. Because yes, they were picking first. Yes, they picked the most obvious prospect in decades. But they also picked the best prospect at quarterback for years. Trevor Lawrence, if they don't mess it up, which is always the caveat with everything, has the possibility and the potential to transform that franchise into something that isn't the absolute joke that they are now. He has got leadership, he has got style, he has got swagger, but he's also got the ability to back every single one of those up. That guy is going to get on the field and we are all going to be amazed at what the Jacksonville Jaguars become. Backed up by picking Travis Etienne, which I think, we were all thinking, well, they've got James Robinson. He did really well last year. But he did really well last year. But running back is a position that we know has a very short shelf life. So why not go and get the next best player available? Why not go and get Etienne and follow up on what a lot of teams were doing in this draft and go and get your quarterback's teammate? Those two know each other. Those two already have not just a good relationship on and off the field, but will have that link where they'll know what the other one is going to do. We've talked about those kinds of things previously with the connection between Travis Kelce, mentioning him again, and Patrick Mahomes, where they've just talked about the fact that Kelsey's come back to the bench like, how did you know that I was going to go and do that? And Mahomes is just what I would have done. I think they've already got that link, and I think they're going to be really well together.
I think as well, we've kind of talked about it earlier in the day. when you were saying, Phil, that you weren't sure about that pick and could they have maybe got a receiver or another weapon or, solved another position. But I think as well, the Jags probably view Etienne as a receiver as much as a running back. And I think that is where his value massively increases because, yes, they've got James Robinson as the absolute ground and pound kind of running back to bulldoze through the line. But Etienne offers that change of pace. He's got really great soft hands catching the ball out of the backfield. And I think they line him up in lots of different spots and it creates mismatches. And then with that connection with Lawrence, I think that really helps. So I think that makes a lot of sense for me.
I'll tell you what I love about the Jags pick, and without being too centered around the Cardinals again, I remember when we had the first pick, obviously a couple of years ago, and went for Kyler Murray. There was a great interview with Steve Kime, and they said, "Oh, Steve, is it exciting having the number one overall pick?" And he said, "No, it's an embarrassment because I was the general manager of the team that finished lowest in the NFL and gave us the opportunity." And he said, "The only thing that you get with the number one pick is an opportunity to never have the number one pick again. You have the opportunity to pick the single best player in college football and to move your team forward." And I think that's it for the Jaguars. I think there's something about, if you're going to have the number one overall pick, have it in that Andrew Luck, Peyton Manning type draft where there is an absolute superstar quarterback who is not only an obvious week one starter, but I think would improve an awful lot of teams in the NFL. And I think you're right. Add in playmakers, whether it's one running back, wide receiver, and there's still 6 rounds of this left. I think that is an absolute, transformational pick as you described it, JB. I think the Jags come out of that brilliantly.
So for losers, I'm in agreement with Aldrin, obviously, about the Texans, because how can you not think the Texans are the losers in this draft? And yeah, about the Seahawks as well. The Seahawks only have 3 picks across the entire draft, and there are more holes on that roster than 3 picks are going to patch up. But counter that to the fact that the Seahawks are always very active and sometimes very successful in bringing in undrafted free agents. They approach it very differently to other teams. So maybe they're kind of banking on producing something out of that again. But for my main loser, and again, I'm prefacing this with a currently, based on how the rest of the draft goes, I am going to talk about the pride of some parts of Ohio, the orange and black attack that is the Cincinnati Bengals. Jamar Chase is an excellent receiver. Of this, there is no doubt. Pairing Jamar Chase again with Joe Burrow makes absolutely sense for the same reason I talked about Travis Etienne and Trevor Lawrence. You're giving your quarterback someone they know, someone that they can go to, someone that they don't have to work too hard in forging that kind of bond. However, as good as the bond is, if Joe Burrow is flat on his back, he can't throw anybody the ball. What on earth were they doing? Not even if you weren't sold on Sewell because he's been out for the year, there were good tackles, there were good offensive line pieces that the Bengals sorely needed. And we know this because we watched their quarterback get broken last year by the fact that they couldn't protect him. Chase will make good plays, but Burrow has to actually be standing to do something with it.
I'd agree on that. I think we've all seen that meme, haven't we, from the Bengals New Jersey reveal where it says, show me or tell me you're going to draft Penei Sewell without telling me you're going to draft Penei Sewell, and it just zones in on the massive knee scar on Joe Burrow's it's the massive scar on Joe Burrow's knee. It seemed like that crazy thing where they must take him because they just need to protect that star guy, the number one guy that they took last year. Having said that, as I said on a previous podcast, they signed these two tackles in free agency and said that they were going to be happy with them as their starting tackles. So that kind of shows maybe that is the case because they've gone one wide receiver, and it'll be interesting to see this. They were going to be one of my losers of the draft, actually. And what I was going to say was, it's easy saying it after round 1, isn't it? But if they go and get two tackles in the net or 2 guards or whatever, they beef up the O-line in the next round or 2, and they get players that probably fell to them at a good spot, then it could look totally different after the weekend, really. But yeah, certainly for now, I absolutely agree with you.
I'm probably, I don't know about Rob, but I'm maybe one that disagrees with both of you, really. I think Jamar Chase was the best player in the draft at that point. I think, yes, I do. I agree. I think Penei Sewell ends up being a Pro Bowl Hall of Famer eventually, because I think he's got that talent, and that seems to be the consensus among everybody. However, I do think Jamar Chase is an absolutely elite player that they are in need of. And I think they'll be pretty happy with how the rest of round one shook down, because I think there's Tevin Jenkins still there, and he's more than likely still going to be there where they pick him towards the top of round two. So I think you can still solve the need of tackle with Tevin Jenkins, who, I think pretty much all scouts agree has got a round one kind of grade on him. So I do think they still maybe come out of it all the better for it. They end up getting an absolute stud playmaker in Jamar Chase, and potentially a top tier left tackle still in the draft. So I think, yeah, like James says, you've got to caveat it with how the rest of the draft shakes out. But I think Chase is a great pick for them still.
Yeah, I've got to say I'm not as disappointed they didn't go and get Sewell. I think it's a team completely devoid of playmakers, isn't it, really? Minus a young quarterback that, I don't know, I've still not necessarily seen that he's the future for them, but they certainly seem to think he is. And why wouldn't they, having picked him, one overall the year before? I just think I was about to say without Ross, but actually Ross never really did he? Flashed for a couple of games at the start of, was it last season or maybe even the year before? But I think when you lose your wide receiver one, even when we're talking about a guy probably way past his best in AJ Green, but you lose any focal point for the passing game in that offense, I think you've got to go and get somebody, haven't you? Particularly when you've got the ability to get such a talented receiver. Great speed, great route running ability. I think, somebody who, could really develop into that number one receiver that not only shares that kind of chemistry with Joe Burrow already, but they could end up having, very long and successful careers together. And I think that's probably part of the logic and thinking. The only problem with the Bengals, and it's a bit like, the Texans, only the Texans haven't got picks. The problem is there are never enough picks for a team like the Bengals. There are too many holes and too many gaps to see a route to be competitive anytime soon. But yeah, the pick in isolation, I can't say I have any particular issue with. I think they've got a real talented player. So
I think your point around John Ross is kind of correct. I think he is the Gabriel Obertan of the NFL, and that he's really quick going down the field, but hasn't really got any idea what he's doing when he gets anywhere. The Bengals are a team devoid of skill players, with apologies to anybody that likes Joe Mixon, but you've got to start from the foundation. I think you've got to start in the trenches. And right now, the Bengals don't have trenches. They just have Swiss cheese inviting teams like the Cowboys, teams like the Colts, who've picked up strong defensive talent, and said, hey, well, you got him last year. Do you want to have another go this year?
But the Mixon point is an interesting one, because Joe Mixon, for me, ends up being one of the most underrated yet somehow overpaid running backs in the league. He's a bizarre combination. But when you talk about this Swiss cheese defense, Sewell doesn't solve a Swiss cheese. Sewell wasn't the answer either, was he? I think, like I say, there just were not enough picks for a team like the Bengals to steady that ship. And it's going to take a good few years yet. But yeah, do you remember when people thought John Ross might be a starting high-quality receiver? God, how times change. So, PB, who do you think are our winners and losers from round one of the 2021 NFL draft?
So I think, and this will be much to the chagrin of James Aldrin, that the Patriots you could class as a winner now. The debates about Mac Jones and his ability level is everybody's got their own opinion on it, I suppose. But if you look at it in isolation, take the guy's skill set out of the equation. So let's pretend we're talking about Peyton Manning. And let's say the New England Patriots identified this guy as the guy that they wanted to get no matter what. They didn't have to trade up. People were talking about them trading up, trading up for Justin Fields if he was still going to be there, or trading up for Trey Lance if the 49ers took Mac Jones. But they obviously identified Mac Jones. They didn't trade up. There were trades around them. They stayed put at 15 and they got the guy that they wanted in the first place. So, take the guy's skill set out of the equation. I think you could class them as a winner because they got the quarterback they probably wanted and probably needed without having to give up anything else. And I think that's a win for them.
If I can just interject there, the repeated use of take his skill set out of the equation nullifies your argument entirely for
that's
me.
Not me saying he's not the right guy though. That's me with knowledge of your opinion, your slating of his ability over the last couple of weeks. But I think a lot of people have said he's Tom Brady-like in terms of the way he plays. He's an accurate, tall pocket passer, and if you've got somebody like that, where's the best situation he's going to go? Well, where a guy like that has been pretty damn successful. So, I'm not saying that he's going to come in and be Brady. That don't get me wrong. I'm not passing comment on his skill set either way. But the Patriots are a winner because they didn't have to do anything. They haven't given up a lot, and they got the guy that they wanted. So that's how I'm kind of clarifying that.
I'm with you, Phil. I think the Patriots did really well with the 15th pick of the first round to get a second round talent. I think they did really, really well. Congratulations to those at Gillette Stadium.
I get where Phil's coming from, and I think the logic he's using is valid because let's not forget this time, 3-4 weeks ago, we were talking about whether the 49ers were going to take Mac Jones with the third pick, and we disagreed with it. But there were multiple people, there were scouts, people who work in the NFL who know a heck of a lot more than we do, who also considered the 49ers taking Mac Jones as a thing. And I'm reaching for it because there was a quote I read yesterday after the Patriots picked him that basically talked about if his receivers can get there, then Jones can put the ball on them. And said, well, the problem with that is the Patriots don't really have that many great receivers right now. So, yes, not having to move forward, not having to give up much to get your quarterback of the future is a positive, and it is something that we would say about any team if they did it, as is good. But you're going again into a team that kind of doesn't maximize your skill set. So I kind of didn't have it down as a win or a loss. I kind of had it as this is the thing that happened and it will be interesting to see where it goes.
I'm just going to come in on the last point because I know that Phil obviously has specifically chosen his winners just to rile me up. But I just think where you say they got the guy that they absolutely wanted, if I was the Patriots, I would have been absolutely gutted that the 49ers took Trey Lance and not Mac Jones. I think they would have been thrilled if Fields or probably Trey Lance had fallen further. And I just think where they stayed put just showed a little bit of a lack of ambition in getting a better player. I think Fields was, in my mind, and from everything that I've seen of his tape, the second best quarterback in this draft. So the fact that they wouldn't even go up to 11 to get him maybe kind of says that the guy they were after wasn't there for them and they didn't want to make a move. So I've said enough about what I think of Mac Jones. I think I'm with Rob. He's a round 2 talent. Tom Brady ended up being a round 6 talent, didn't he? And so we can all be proved wrong, but I'm not sold on him. And I think maybe they could have got somebody better, but there you go.
I mean, the thing for me, and a really quick point, is I think this could be the end of the dynasty that is the New England Patriots. And I know that sounds incredibly dramatic, but I wonder how many more seasons Belichick has got in him, like Pete Carroll and like Bruce Arians and these other older coaches in the league. And the other thing is the thing for me, to kind of contrary to your point in a way, Phil, is it feels like the lack of a long-term plan. Because if you've got Cam Newton and if you've got Mac Jones, show me that playbook. Because those two players, however you rate them or rank them, are not the same types of players and they are not in a similar mold. So if you're thinking it's a Dolphins-like scenario where Cam Newton plays till week 5 or 6 and then Mac Jones gets his chance. I just think you're asking Josh McDaniel or whoever pulls the strings really with that offensive playbook to work miracles, really. Now, in a week, if they've got Jimmy Garoppolo on that roster, I would say that's a better pairing, Garoppolo with Jones, but I'd say you've wasted the pick then on Mac Jones because I think Jimmy Garoppolo's still probably got his best years ahead of him somewhere. You know what? Let's hope it works out. But I just can't quite see the logic.
Yeah, I can't see Garoppolo going there now when they've just drafted Mac Jones and they've re-signed Cam Newton. But then having said that, the Chicago Bears have now got Nick Foles, Andy Dalton and Justin Fields. And Fields, I imagine, will be the starter early this year. So who knows in the wacky world of the NFL. But my second winner, I think, is actually the New York Giants. And I think they started out as a loser and I think they turned it into a winning situation, to be honest. So I think it's clear they probably wanted Devonta Smith. And then when the Eagles and the Cowboys traded, so the Eagles got above them and took him, I think that probably caught them short a little bit. But the fact they traded down, was it 9? I think 9 picks traded from 11 to 20. And they got an extra 5th pick this year, a 4th rounder next year and a 1st rounder next year. You know, they got the Bears 1st rounder next year. And that, you know, who's to say that's not going to be another high pick? So I think they've done really well out of that. And maybe, you know, Kadarius Toney's a good player and a good option for Daniel Jones this year. He's not Devonta Smith, but you know he's going to be a good option for them. So I think they've done really well out of it, and I'd class them as a winner, even if they didn't end up with the player that they actually wanted.
Unlike your last pick of winner, I'm 100% with you. I think the Giants have done really well out of that. I think they traded down and still got a top tier round 1 wide receiver. I think you're exactly right. They probably wanted Devonta Smith and hoped that he would fall to them. As soon as he didn't, then it made sense to trade back. And I think Gettleman's not known for that, but the fact that he's done it and still come out of it with a top player. And like you said, they've got another 1st round pick next year. So I think 100% you absolutely take that. I think, you know, I've seen a bit more of Tony as a Gators fan, and he sometimes got a little bit inconsistent hands, but when the ball is in his hands, he is absolutely lightning fast and difficult to bring down. So I think that's a great pick for them, and yeah, makes perfect sense.
I like the pick going along with kind of some of the other additions the Giants have made on offense this offseason, primarily picking up Kenny Golladay from the Lions. I think that's a great pick. And obviously they're going to have Saquon Barkley back, hopefully, the Giants fans, for longer than they had him last season. I think the only real concern I've got about kind of loading up this Giants offense is we're trusting Jason Garrett to be able to scheme up all of these things to get all of these players in positions to do amazing things. Yes, Tony is great once he has the ball in his hands, but Garrett needs to scheme something up to get the ball from Jones to Tony. And do we have the faith that Jason Garrett can do it? Or is this, again, another piece that at the end of this season, a new head coach and a new offensive coordinator are again going to have all of these pieces to play with and have to find ways to start pulling it all together again? This, to me, feels a little bit like the Browns pre-Kevin Stefanski. You know, they had Nick Chubb, I think they had Kareem Hunt, they had Odell Beckham Jr., they had Jarvis Landry, and nobody could really work out a way to actually get everybody involved and get a productive offense. It wasn't until Stefanski came in that they did. I'm kind of looking at this and wondering, well, maybe, you know, everybody moves on and they have to start all over again.
So if I'm looking at a loser from the draft, it's hard. Again, you know, it's one of those ones where if you're picking after the 1st round, you know, we could look stupid this time next week because somebody could smash, you know, the next 2 or 3 picks that they make. But I'm thinking the Las Vegas Raiders, if I look at Mel Kiper's draft rankings, they took Alex Leatherwood, who he had ranked as the 10th tackle on the board, you know, his 62nd pick. So I think if you're talking about Mac Jones being a bad pick for being a 2nd round talent, I think Alex Leatherwood is a massive reach the Raiders, and but then they've gone against, everybody's rankings in previous years. So who's to know how that's going to turn out? But to me, I would class them as a loser because I think that's that is a bad pick for them. I'm not sold on the Jaguars either. I know one of you mentioned them. Was it James mentioned them as a winner? I don't, James Robinson looked really good last year, one of the top 5 running backs, I'd say. So taking Etienne, I get the view that he's familiar with Lawrence and is going to be a good pass catching weapon and all that kind of stuff. But I think there are other areas of the team they could have really improved without taking a running back where they, got a good room already. So I'm not sold on that one, to be perfectly honest. And the 49ers, I might mention, I would Trey Lance have been there at 12? It's hard to say. I mean, if you look at all the quarterbacks that were taken, Fields, was taken at 11, so one before 12, but then Mac Jones didn't go until 15. So who knows if they hadn't traded into 3, if someone else had traded in, who they would have taken. But, taking Trey Lance at 3 seems a little bit of a stretch. Could they not have traded a little bit higher maybe, not given so much away to get him? But yeah, again, it's going to be one of those ones though where until they play, until they take a snap and you see what they're like, you're never going to know really. So, but I think they're a bit of a loser for me.
I'm going to disagree with you on that one in particular. I think if Trey Lance is the guy that you've fallen in love with and you think you can build your offense around for the next 15, 20 years, then I don't think that is too steep a price to pay. I think I disagree. I don't think Trey Lance would have been there at 12. I think he goes, there was plenty of quarterback needy teams as we saw. And I think the fact that the 49ers were the ones that jumped and went to 3 probably just meant that somebody else couldn't. So I do think that he's got all of the intangibles to take that 49ers team into a different stratosphere. I think ultimately the winner, if I'm looking at it from the 49ers, is probably Jimmy G, because I think that more than likely gives him another year in running that offense, because I don't think Trey Lance is ready to start just yet. That's not to say that I don't think Shanahan won't scheme up some plays for him to be involved in this year, but I do think it probably means that Jimmy G is the leader on that offense for another year, at least until Trey Lance has built up some experience. But yeah, I'm 100% with you on the Raiders. I think that was an absolute leap into a different dimension for a player that they could have got in round 3 more than likely. So, but like you say, they often go against the grain and the draft order of a lot of scouts and pundits, but equally, I don't think really any of those where they've gone against that has particularly paid off or shown to be blowing scouts out of the water with a complete lack of knowledge. So I just think it's a bit of a leap.
So I had kind of thoughts on the Raiders to kind of bring up in our anything else we wanted to talk about here at the end here. I think the picks did surprise a lot of people. On the NFL Network broadcast, Daniel Jeremiah was very surprised and kind of said, well, he's a kind of a player who's all over the map. Some people are really, really high on him. Others kind of don't rate him that well in comparison to everybody else. Before Daniel Jeremiah was the voice of the draft for the NFL Network, it was a guy called Mike Mayock. And every year, Mike Mayock would do one mock draft. Wouldn't do versions where he would revise them and here's version 7 or anything like that. There was one mock draft that he did when he was satisfied he understood all of the players. He would do an hours-long conference call about all of the draft prospects, and he would take questions from reporters and questions from everybody and would always be able to answer them very detailed and very articulately. He was a guy who put so much effort and research into players to make sure that he understood everything about them. That same Mike Mayock is the guy making these decisions for the Raiders because he's now their GM. It was the same thing with one of their first round picks last year, which I know we've kind of talked about, but Mayock has an idea of what he wants from a football player. They are these specific statistics, these specific attributes is what he's looking for. And yeah, they don't always align with what you think every other team is looking for, but he likes for this is how this person is going to plug into our organization. I do think it's going to be interesting because Mayock's philosophy, I think, is a direct contradiction to John Gruden's philosophy. John Gruden likes veteran players who he doesn't need to put that much effort into and can just give them a thing and go. So that constant battle for the Raiders between the light and the dark, depending on whose side of it you are on, is going to be interesting to see for the rest of the season.
So my point would be, there is a lovely narrative there about Mike Mayock, but there is no verses. John Gruden got given a 10-year contract to be the head coach of the Vegas Raiders, and what he says goes. And if you look at the history of John Gruden in the NFL draft, Gruden drafts character guys, right? It's that say that I saw a meme the day before the draft that said the NFL draft, the year that John Gruden picks another nobody and tells you he's got really great character and he's going to be a brilliant locker room guy. That's to your point about Gruden. Gruden picks football players, right? And Gruden likes guys to have a bit of soil under their fingernails and to like to wrap tape around their, wrists and ankles like they're playing in the 80s. I think the Las Vegas Raiders always do things their own way. And actually, of all the teams, I think Gruden getting Mayock is actually the perfect foil, because I think Mayock is obsessed by a part of the game that Gruden is not, and he's not that interested in. And I think between the two of them, they will end up with a competitive roster. I think it's not yet felt like they've found the splashes they were hoping for, and whether it was trying to get Brady and the fact that Carr is still going to be under center is bizarre to me, because as talented as the guy is, he's clearly not the guy they're sold on. And I think as a franchise, if that's what you've got at quarterback, you have to do what the 49ers are doing, right? If you're not sold on the guy, go and do something and get somebody. To your point on the 49ers, Phil, there was a really interesting interview done with Shanahan where they asked him about 3 and they said, did you move up to 3 with a specific player in mind? And his answer was kind of, no, we moved up knowing there are 3 really good quarterbacks in that draft, and that at 3, one of them's always going to fall to you. And we felt really good about whichever one of them it was. And I kind of like the fact that the 49ers put themselves in the driving seat, a bit like we said about Dave Gettleman a few years ago when he picked Daniel Jones, there was all that ruckus, but if you believe he's your guy, go get him. Like you said, Aldrin, if they're sold enough on people that they think they can see them steering the franchise for years and years, go get them. But equally, for all of that exposition and explanation I've just given, I would still have the Las Vegas Raiders as a big loser. I think they could have done something bigger and better. But I mean, that's John Gruden all over for me.
So as we were talking about kind of the 49ers, one of the things I read up on yesterday was the idea that Shanahan soured, that was difficult, on Garoppolo after the Super Bowl. So it wasn't anything that happened last season. It was the Super Bowl itself, because Shanahan schemed open Kittle specifically at various points. He schemed open the wide receivers, and Garoppolo went to the wrong person. And I think Shanahan, as we know from all of the pre-game stuff when the Falcons were in the Super Bowl and we saw the relationship he had with Matt Ryan, Shanahan believes in his scheme more than I think he believes in any individual player. So I think he was always going to be looking for someone that he felt could execute that scheme rather than a player that he will get and be able to plug things in for and kind of change what they're doing to fit the skill set there. I think they've gone for Lance because they believe he is that person that can get in there and can execute like it's meant to be executed and really get kind of that offensive engine sort of humming and running perfectly.
I think as well, just on that, I think with Lance, you open up that scheme as well. I think you're plugging bolt-ons onto that offense now, because all of a sudden, and the reason that people were so sold on Mac Jones is, he's got the attributes that Shanahan can work with brilliantly, and he's done it with Ryan and Cousins and Garoppolo, and it's like, yeah, that's great, but this player in Trey Lance means you can do all of that, and then you've still got the other athletic side of the game where you can, maybe go back to a 49ers team of a few years ago where you threw Kaepernick in and you go, okay, well, we can now add in some designed runs and we can add in a bit more dynamism to that offense. So I just think it's a match made in heaven, really, because you've got all of the mental and the experience. And I know I say experience, he's only got 17 games, but in a pro style offense. So I think that probably gives Shanahan a lot more comfort in terms of, he's going to be able to come in and run my scheme. And like you said, James, play to the players that he's designed plays to work for. But equally, he can also then take off if he needs to and add that kind of side of the game to that 49ers offense.
I'm with you. I think part of the pick and part of that desire to get a mobile quarterback is actually just the NFC West. It's playing against defenses like the Seahawks, the kind of personnel talent now the Cardinals and the Rams have. I think it's a tailor-made pick to stay relevant in that division. But interesting times. So does that mean it's rolled around to me?
Uh-huh.
So unlike you guys, I only have one winner, one loser. And bizarrely, they are not separated by a huge amount. But I'm going to start off by giving you my winner, who I think is the Chicago Bears, and I'll tell you why. The Chicago Bears have traded away next year's first round pick to go and get their quarterback of the future. And to get that guy at 11, I think is the first victory. I am with you, Aldrin. You made a comment earlier that Fields is the second best quarterback in this draft class, and I would agree with you. And the reason I would agree with you is that when games are on the line and when plays need to be made, he seems to be the guy that has that absolute focus and can really lock in. And you look at, his college performances, some of those second half performances, particularly games on the line, I felt like he stepped up. Now, the Bears are a really interesting case, because if you were to go back to the start of last season and say with the competition they have in the division, an Aaron Rodgers-led Packers and the Vikings, a number of teams that felt like a real threat to get into the postseason, you'd have said the Bears making the playoffs was, if not in line with expectations, then probably a successful season. Yet the way they made the playoffs and the way they then got dumped pretty unceremoniously in the first game seems to leave a bit of a sour taste, really, in Chicago. They obviously got off to a good start, then didn't really know who their best quarterback was, then finally got the run game going that kind of got them out of trouble, and they make it into that postseason phase. But bizarrely, I think they go into this season with a GM and head coach both on the hot seat. This was a, massive draft for them. And I think they could be one and done if things don't go their way this year. And I think as much as I think the GM should have gone already in pace, I think it would be both of them. I think if they go, they'll most likely go together. So for me, unlike, and this example was given, someone like the Houston Texans, who are in this kind of Bears-like malaise, the Texans don't have the opportunity to go and get a young, exciting, different player. I think adding Fields, and again, I can imagine what Dalton starting the first 4, 5, 6 games, Fields coming in later in the season, gives the fans something to cheer, gives a bit of excitement, gives a bit of spark, a bit of boost, a bit of energy. And all of a sudden, I think the whole complexion of that franchise changes with that pick. Yeah, they lose their first next season. But do you know what? For a quarterback of the future, and I come back to it, not only the second best quarterback in that draft, but the second best quarterback behind an absolute superstar in Lawrence. I mean, we're talking second to a generational type talent going at one. I think they've done some absolutely brilliant business. And what have they given up as well as the first? Was it a fourth and a fifth? I mean, tell me how many times a fourth and a fifth end up changing your team dramatically. That's great business for the Bears. To pick him at 11 is super. And well done for them. Well done to them for really picking their way through the draft well. Now, my loser is actually, I said not a million miles away. My loser actually is Fields himself, because as much as there is a narrative that says he comes in and improves the Chicago Bears, saves the job of the head coach and GM and really changes the fortunes of that franchise, fast forward 12 months to a year that's not gone well. This is a top prospect who, a bit like Sam Darnold, will find himself going into year 2 with a new head coach, probably a new offensive coordinator, new general manager. Now, as much as quarterbacks sometimes recover from that, look at the real top tier talents that just never get that chance. You know, the new GM comes in after a season because they've had a bad season. There's a high draft pick, or maybe the potential, I suppose they've lost their one, haven't they now? Maybe the potential to trade up if the GM falls in love with one of next year's prospects. I just think for Fields, he could end up being like a Josh Rosen type character who comes in highly touted, but just never quite finds his feet. And that for me would be a real pity. I think if the Bears end up damaging Fields, that would rob the league of not only a potential superstar, but I think one of the more exciting players to watch, who, from what I've seen of his college tape, and I keep coming back to this on our podcast, I'm not a huge college football fan, but from what I've seen, there is so much to like. You know, being zoned in when it matters, great talent, plays the whole game quickly, you know, let alone his ability with his feet or his hands, just plays the whole game fast. And I'd love to see him do well. Is Chicago his best opportunity to do that? I'm not so sure.
I am pretty much bang on with you on both counts, probably, I think. I think it's great business for the Bears, but always felt like business that had to be made this year. Like you said there, both those guys are on the hot seat. And I think Ryan Pace, if he's sat at 20 and doesn't trade up and draft Fields, is picking, you know, a random guard or, you know, a middling playmaker. So I think absolutely they had to go up and make a splash and get their probably quarterback of the future. I'm a little less with you on Fields being the loser, purely because I think the fact that he slid to 11 puts a chip on his shoulder, and there's enough talent in that Bears offense. Certainly, I know, you know, the running game was really strong towards the back end of the year. We talked about Allen Robinson being the absolute stud that he is. I think he elevates that offense. And I think, you know, I said it earlier today, I think week 6, Justin Fields is taking the field and, you know, driving them towards the playoffs. So I think absolutely he makes them better. And certainly when he comes in, I think he'll really take over. I'm with you on all of his college tape. He is an absolute superstar player with all of the intangibles. You know, I mean, the guy's 40 time was ridiculous and he was falling over. So I think, yeah, he's a phenomenal athlete and player.
I love all the media coverage that says, what are the Bears now going to do when they've got Nick Foles, Andy Dalton and Fields? And the answers will sit Andy Dalton and Nick Foles on the bench, right? I mean, that's the easiest quandary in pro football, because even if you believe in Nick Foles, and look, I'm not very high on Nick Foles, being fully aware that the guy was a very deserving Super Bowl MVP not that long ago. But Nick Foles has never played a full regular season in his life. I mean, the guy just can't stay upright. People have watched Andy Dalton play football before as well, right? I mean, he's a reasonable player, but I mean, if you're not telling me that Andy Dalton's, you know, past his peak, then I'm not sure we should be friends. I just think the Bears did the best they could do. I feel a bit sorry for Fields. I think he comes into a messy situation. But like I say, let's hope they're both winners.
Well, one of the stats they pulled up yesterday was one that I actually made sure to write down in case I needed it, which was that none of the quarterbacks drafted in the first round between 2009 and 2016 currently play for their original team. That is a heck of a long period for no first round picks to generally be considered good enough by their team. And it's another indictment of the fact that quarterback, he arguably, yes, is the most important, but is one of the most harshly judged positions on the football field. And it's one that you have to absolutely make sure that you get right. Yeah, I think the Bears did great business by trading up to get Fields. He wouldn't have been there at 20 because I think he wouldn't have got past the Patriots at 15. If the Patriots had to choose between Fields and Jones, they would have taken Fields, as everybody would have. And they haven't had to give up sort of the future of the team to go and do it. Yes, they don't have a first round pick next year, but you've got your quarterback of the future. So you don't need to necessarily worry about having to go back to that well again and go back to that well again. There's a better feeling about trading up for this player than there was when they traded up to go and get Mitchell Trubisky, 4 years ago now? I can kind of see where Rob's coming from in terms of Fields kind of potentially being a bit of a loser. I think, yeah, there is an incredible amount of pressure on him to perform earlier, but at the same time, is he necessarily going to play straight away? You would think one of Dalton and Folds is going to move on. The other one is probably going to be considered the starter unless Fields amazes in camp. So there is the opportunity to kind of bed him in and see where that goes.
See, on a quick point, I don't think Fields will let himself down. I think the guy's a winner. I think it's more that the coaching mess around him could have an effect. But yeah, I think all fair. But I mean, a weird one, actually. I was reading in preparation for the pod about the Bears, and it's amazing to think such a storied franchise have not really had those standout kind of franchise quarterbacks. I mean, obviously the 85 Bears famously with McMahon, was a real character and was a real leader on that team. But by the time we get to 88, I think they got Mike Tomczak and, McMahon was, so they've never really had, the kind of, I mean, not many teams have had a Brady or a Rodgers, but that real long-standing kind of franchise quarterback that so many teams have across their history. A bit like maybe the Cardinals in that sense and very few others, but really surprised for such a well-storied franchise as the Bears that they don't really have those characters going back through the last 3 or 4 decades. But yeah, maybe Fields is the answer. So to round out our draft chat, a quick round the room to do any other business. So anything else related to the NFL draft? And PB, are you primed and ready to kick us off?
Primed and ready. I think this is probably going to be one for a future summer podcast, but all the buzz pre-draft was less about the draft and more about, is Aaron Rodgers going to be in Green Bay next year? So, I think that's one that has been bubbling for a little while, but seems to have some legs with it now. I've just read a tweet from Rap Sheet that says if Rodgers were to retire, to go and host Jeopardy full time or something like that, he'd have to pay back $11.5 million this year and $11.5 million next year if he was to stay retired. So, and apparently that it's a genuine consideration. So he's not a happy man. It's hard to see quarterback landing spots, I suppose, in terms of where he could go. I know the Broncos are potentially interested in him. Who knows what's happening with the Houston Texans and Deshaun Watson, and could that be somewhere that he could go as well? Who knows? But for me personally, I can't see him not being the starting quarterback in Green Bay next year, but it's certainly an interesting situation. And that stole the headlines from the biggest news of draft day yesterday, which was, of course, Tim Tebow having a tryout with the Jacksonville Jaguars, potentially them thinking of signing him as a tight end. So, that's he's obviously got history with Urban Meyer, I believe. He's probably seen the success of Taysom Hill at the Saints, so it could be an interesting option. And wouldn't everybody love having Tebow back in the league?
And say, as a Gators fan, it would be great to have 3 new Gators playing for teams this year. Obviously, Pitts and Tony already drafted. And yeah, Tebow turning up at tight end for Trevor Lawrence would be absolutely bizarre. I'm with you on Rodgers. I think I saw something funny the other day. I think it was that the Green Bay Packers haven't drafted an offensive player since 2012. Except last year when they drafted a quarterback. So you've got a feel for Aaron Rodgers.
Rodgers has thrown touchdowns to 1 first-round pick his entire career. It's Mercedes Lewis. It is incredible that they've had a talent like that and just not surrounded him with top-tier players.
Just on that point, that's Mercedes Lewis, who was the first-round pick for the Jags and has kind of come to the Packers. With respects to Mercedes Lewis, who we've seen catch touchdowns at Wembley at kind of the tail end of his career. But no, sorry, Aldrin's point was exactly the same kind of thing I had. Last year, before the draft, Aaron Rodgers basically said, yeah, it would be really good if the team would invest in the offense and if they, we could have like a real playmaker that we could get involved. And the Packers said, I know exactly what you mean, Aaron. We're going to draft a quarterback. And this year, Aaron Rodgers has come out on draft day basically said, I don't want to play for this team anymore. And the Packers have gone, Aaron, we know exactly what you mean. We're going to go draft another cornerback. They have neglected this offense. And I've heard people talk about this and say, but the Packers aren't exactly like short of offensive talent. They've got Vontae Adams, they've got Aaron Jones, they've got kind of the litany of three named receivers that we can talk about. But the fact is, all of them are good because potentially they play with Aaron Rodgers. These aren't high drafted explosive players like the ones that we're talking about. So it's an incredible like gambit for the Packers. Could we just see Aaron Rodgers retire? Could Aaron Rodgers ride out into the sunset as the league MVP?
Aaron Rodgers needs to remember that with one play left before halftime, only a few months ago, he'd have done anything for better cornerbacks.
Exactly what I was just going to say.
He's now got him. Let's not feel too sorry for Aaron Rodgers. It's a bit like the Steelers thing, isn't it? All of a sudden, everyone's down on the Steelers, yet they were 11-0 at one point last season and steamrolling everybody. And the Green Bay Packers were 1.5 bad quarters away from probably going into the Super Bowl as favourites. So I think it needs solving. I mean, there's clearly a rift there between head coach and quarterback. And do you know what? In those power struggles, who knows? Who knows? I'm never surprised, when those things, truly do go off. But I mean, they've got to go. And also where they're picking in, if they're picking at 5 and they've got Chase on the board, there's an argument, right? Where they're picking, I mean, come on. I mean, I think they've got themselves a good player, and I think they'll go into this season as competitive as always.
I think I was going to make that exact same point. The Bucs torched them basically because of the play of Kevin King, so they needed to upgrade on cornerback. So I don't think it's a bad pick, but yeah, and they had a good offense last year. This is the thing, isn't it? Everybody talks about it, and we just joked about it, but they had a really good offense last year. They put up a lot of points. That wasn't the reason. I don't think that they lost to the Bucs. So. Did they strengthen a need position? Probably, but yeah, it's not helping their case with keeping our A-Rod happy, is it?
I think if you're A-Rod, though, you look over and you see Tom Brady basically pulling on all of his connections and going to the GM and saying, bring me all of these players, and it immediately happens. He goes and gets an all-pro tight end. He goes and gets an all-pro wide receiver. He brings in running backs and playmakers galore. And Aaron Rodgers says, bring me some players to work with. And they bring in Jordan Love and a 29th selection cornerback. You can kind of see where he gets frustrated. It's
the other thing I think we have to consider with all of this is the Green Bay Packers went from Super Bowl champion and amazing quarterback Brett Favre to Super Bowl champion and amazing quarterback Aaron Rodgers. In much the same way that we used to talk about how the Colts went from Peyton Manning to Andrew Luck with a season in the middle that we don't really want to talk about. And like we've just had a conversation about the Bears and how the Bears have never really had that kind of generational quarterback talent. We've talked about the Browns before. We've talked about the Jags. All of these teams who would absolutely sell everything they owned in every house of every person that works for them to get one quarterback, the caliber of the two that we just talked about for the Packers. I think the Packers have to play this very, very carefully because Jordan Love could be amazing, but the chances of the Packers going, Favre was great, Rodgers was great, Love is great, is incredibly slim. And it might be one of those cases of where you don't know what you've got till it's gone. And maybe he shouldn't be gone because we should have treated him just a little bit better.
Reminds me of a chat we had a few weeks ago about the Steelers and have they done enough with the talent they have on the roster, with the Super Bowls they've ended up winning as much as they're the second most successful franchise in NFL history. If you've had Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers as your starting quarterbacks, the last 30 years, pretty much now, is 2 Super Bowls enough, considering that talent under center? Now there's the argument, Marino never won a Super Bowl and so on and so forth. But I mean, wow, if Rodgers only ends up winning the one, obviously Favre won the one, but, was involved in that second, which was a great tussle with the Broncos. I don't know. Is that a missed opportunity? Like you say, maybe Jordan Love is the next Patrick Mahomes. Who knows? but they would be very lucky to make it 3 in a row, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I think so. So the other two things that I think I had, and again, this probably sums it up as a winner and a loser. I do want to say that I think the New York Jets drafted very well. Obviously, getting Zach Wilson was great. I'm quite high on Zach Wilson. I think for all as much as we talked about like Fields and Lance, I think Wilson was the second best quarterback in the draft. So being able to get him and finally maybe solidify that position is great. And then trading up to get Elijah Vera Tucker. I think they got Mekhi Becton last year and he's performed really, really well. I think Vera Tucker kind of solidifies that left side of the line, which is what you want because that's going to be the majority of the blindside stuff that's going to come from there. And hopefully that's kind of the wall in front that will give Wilson the cushion he needs to be able to distribute the ball and really get the Jets going there. The other one that I wanted to talk about as a potential loser was number 7 and the Detroit Lions. Now, we talked about how good we think Penei Sewell is. We talked about the fact that I specifically talked about the fact that I thought the Bengals were absolutely bonkers for not picking him at 5. Last year, the Lions had the worst total and scoring defense. The Lions have never played in a Super Bowl. The Lions have been incredibly spotty in actually making it to the playoffs. And this year, they have, aside from bringing Alex Anzalone in from the Saints, done very, very little to actually improve their defense whatsoever. I think taking Sewell and neglecting the defense is probably something they're going to regret.
The only thing that I would counter with that is, and I think you almost made half of my point for me in terms of, where they've got to and what problems they've got on defense. Kind of like Rob said with the Cincinnati Bengals, there aren't enough picks to solve their problems. So purely taking the best player off the board that maybe improves your offense, I don't think is a bad move. I think if Penei Sewell falls to you, you have to take him unless clearly there wasn't enough of a trade market for 7 to, give them enough picks in round 1, probably, to solve some of those problems. So I think you just have to go for the best player in the draft because unless you're getting 5 picks in return, you're not solving those problems on defense in one fell swoop with, to be honest, any of the defensive players in there probably aren't going to solve those challenges.
The only point I'd make on the Lions comparing them to the Bengals is when we say there aren't enough picks for the Lions to solve all their problems, they do have enough picks. They're just not this year. And I think the Lions are probably the team who are sitting in the top 10 who are probably thinking the most long term, aren't they? I think the Lions are probably thinking, Sewell's, potentially a standout talent in his position, the type of player that, you'd want, anchoring that line for the next, 10, 12 years, go get him. And then next year you fill every other gap, don't you? I mean, next year, I think they'll probably be looking for a quarterback. I don't know. I think Jared Goff is a starter, but I think as we discussed a few months ago on this very pod, not a 130 million over 5 years starter, is he? So it's one of those where I think they're going to take a few years to turn themselves around, but a bit like the Jets, they've got great draft capital. It feels like they've brought in coaches who will re-energize those franchises to a degree. And I think there's better things ahead for the Lions. I just think they're a year behind where the Jets are now. I think next year is where the Lions get to do what the Jets are doing at the moment.
Just as a last point then, just on James's comment, I'm not as high on Wilson as a lot of people are. I think he had a very good season at BYU, but a very mediocre couple of seasons at BYU prior to that. Now, I know that people will cite, elbow and shoulder injuries and this, that, and the other. But aside from a COVID year, he wasn't anywhere in the consideration. I think he makes some very nice off-platform throws, and that's great. But I think if you've watched the pro days from, Lance or Fields, I think all of them make those splash plays. And I still think Fields is the better quarterback. And for him to go 11 is a bit of a travesty in his sense. But equally, I think it's, a sign of the times when just a team falls in love with a guy. And, I think Wilson is clearly the guy that the Jets fell in love with early doors, so much so that they were quite happy to let Darnold walk and kind of pin their flag to the mast on taking Wilson. But he for me feels more like a boom or bust player than Fields does. And I think if they don't do right by him, you end up in another Darnold situation in 3 years' time where you've messed a potentially talented but still needs improvement quarterback around with different offenses, different schemes, and then end up with, trading away your first round pick and hoping to pick someone else up again. It's one of those.
Talking about the Packers, weren't we? How many false dawns have there been with shiny young quarterbacks going into the New York Jets? So who knows? Maybe this is the one that sticks. So as we're on, go on, PB.
Yeah, no, it's just jogged my memory, really. Another winner of the draft, probably Sam Darnold, because there was a thought that the Panthers could take Fields or, which other quarterback might still be there when they picked. So the fact that they didn't pick a QB and they've stuck with Darnold, and I think have they exercised this 5th-year option today?
Straight away.
Yeah, which we thought could have been a doubt. So, if nothing else is going to give him confidence that the team are behind him and it's going to be his team, sink or swim almost. So, there's not going to be that difficult part of, if I mess up, they've got a hot young rookie to put in. So actually, I've got to be really careful and kind of make him quite tense. I think, he's got that freedom now to know he's the guy there. And if he achieves, then there's better things ahead for him, hopefully. And I think he will. I think he got dealt a bad hand with the Jets. Obviously, I don't want him to do too well because he's in the Bucs division, but I could see him doing good things there. So yeah, hopefully it works out. But I think he's definitely come out a winner.
I'll say it again. He is a year younger than Joe Burrow. So, don't forget that he's still a really young quarterback that you can mold. Younger.
Yeah, I love Sam Darnold. Really? I think he'll be a great player. My last one, actually, any other business, is not massively removed from that. Teddy Bridgewater. All the talk about the Denver Broncos didn't need a quarterback because they were able to do a deal and bring in Teddy. Somebody needs to tell the NFL that guy is not a starting quarterback in this league. And I would love him to be. The talent when he came into the league seemed great. There was nothing I saw last year that says he's the answer to any of Denver's problems at all.
Go back a year before. Was it just the 1 year he spent in New Orleans? Was he there for 2? I can't remember. And when Breeze was out injured, they barely missed a beat. And I know that
with superstars around him.
Yeah.
See Andy Dalton in Dallas for details.
Also, I think see Nick Foles for any 3-game stretch. The guy looks like an absolute world beater, and then weeks 4 to 16 garbage. So anybody can look good in a Sean Payton 3-game offense.
True.
Take this example, right? Take them out of the NFL and put them in the real world. Imagine, Phil, you're about to leave your job and go to a new job. And one of the deals of you leaving your current company and going to your new company is that your old company are going to pay half your wages for a year. That tells you how well that whole situation's going down. But the look, if Teddy proves me wrong, wouldn't that be amazing? But it's just not going to happen. And Denver need to be far more, a bit like I just said with the Bears, just make something happen. The 49ers and Bears are showing how it's done. Denver just feel, again, now Elway's moved over, maybe there's a long leash. People have got a few seasons to get it right there, but it just seems like another lost year for me for the Broncos.
I think it's in there though than he did at the Panthers. I know he doesn't have McCaffrey. Well, he barely had McCaffrey when he was at the Panthers, to be fair. But if you look at their receiving core, you've got Jerry Jeudy.
Cortland Sutton.
Cortland Sutton. They've actually got some good, Noah Fant at tight end as well. They've got some good receiving options at tight end. I think,
but cut all that out. Denver Broncos winning season next year, yes or no?
No.
Exactly. Right, and then I think that's the point.
I think the big thing for me is that at 9, Fields was still there. And I know that they have a real need at cornerback, and obviously Surtain was still there because the Panthers took Horn. But at 9, you can take Fields and transform your franchise for the next 20 years, can't you? I don't get it.
you know, maybe they just don't feel to me like the Lions and others. I don't think they should be thinking they're a year away. That division is going to leave them behind if they don't do something soon. And I just felt it was a missed opportunity. So we're on for our longest ever pod.
In that case, can I just drop in one more thing?
You may, and then I will end with the draft story to end all draft stories.
Sorry, just wanted to make sure we dropped in the fact that obviously in breaking news, the Ravens have accepted the fifth-year option on Lamar Jackson. So personally, it's very good to see a team other than the Steelers doing solid running back business at the moment.
Your shade with the Ravens is consistent and ridiculous. I think give the choice. Who would you rather have at quarterback next year, Ben or Lamar? I think everybody else picks Lamar.
But we don't need Lamar because we just drafted Najee Harris. So
shambles.
Right. No bitterness or partisan coverage on this pod. So to end our longest ever podcast, 3 weeks of previewing it, and it feels like a whole week spent reviewing the first round. But my favorite thing this week was following online the NFL draft stories. And there are some amazing ones. Phil, you mentioned at the start, you know, the phone calls to the players. The one that stood out for me and I really want to share with you is from the superstar of all superstars, Deion Sanders, who when he was asked about his draft experience said, and I'll try and read this to get this quote right.
So good.
What I remember most was I was invited to go and see the Giants. So I'm in the room with the Giants. They sat me down and gave me this thick book. Man, this thing was thicker than the phone book. And I said, what's this? And they said, this is our test. We give it to all players and we expect you to read it. I said, excuse me, sir, do you mind me asking, what pick do you have in the NFL draft? The guy from the Giants said, we picked 10th. And I said, man, I'm going to be gone long before them. Got up and left. And that for me is just the most wonderful example of a man who knew exactly what was about to happen.
If that doesn't sum up Deion Sanders, I don't know what does. So good. I love that story.
Sanders, thank you for all the stories you continue to share. And guys, we'll be back in a week where we'll have what I was about to say rounds 2 and 3 to review, but I guess rounds 2 through 7, if anything exciting happens beyond round 3. But I think not only was this a monster of a pod, it was, top quality insight and entertainment that you just don't find anywhere else. And let's come back in a week's time to do the same again.
Absolutely.
Have a good one, gents. See you later.
Good one, Rob. Take care.
Bye.
This is amazing.
Remember to subscribe and be cool. Tell your friends.
The game is over. The game is over.
What are you eating, Phil?
Twiglets.
Like a zoo animal. Like just put stuff in a bucket and throw it over his cage.
Grab before the podcast.
Twiglets are bad.